June 1961. Merritt Cole pressed his boot into the back of an 11-year-old girl's neck and told her if she screamed, her little sister would be the one who paid for it. Evelyn stopped screaming. She never screamed again, not once in 13 years. He took everything from them, their names, their voices, their childhood, their world. And when they finally walked back into Canyon Ridge in 1974, battered and hollow-eyed, the town looked them in the face and said, "We don't believe you." Before we go any further, if this story moves you, if it makes your heart ache or your blood run hot, please subscribe to this channel and follow along with me until the very end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let us begin. Canyon Ridge, Tennessee, August 14th, 1974. Harold Fenwick had been driving the same stretch of Route 9 for 11 years. He knew every curve, every dip in the asphalt, every pine tree that leaned a little too far over the shoulder. He knew this road the way a man knows his own kitchen in the dark. So when he saw the two women standing at the edge of the road that morning, he knew something was wrong before he even had time to think about why. They weren't hitchhiking. They weren't flagging him down. They were just standing there, side by side, in the pale early light, wearing dresses that looked like something out of another decade. Their hands hung at their sides. Their faces were turned toward the road, but their eyes didn't quite track the truck as it slowed. They looked like women who had forgotten how the world worked. Harold pulled to a stop. He rolled down the window. "You ladies all right?" The taller one turned her head slowly. She had dark hair streaked with gray, and she looked to be somewhere in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. But there was something in her face that Harold couldn't name, something worn down and ancient, like old wood. She looked at him for a long moment before she spoke. "We need to go to town," she said. Her voice was quiet and careful, like someone who had learned to measure every word before letting it out. "Which town?" Harold asked. "Canyon Ridge," she said. Harold felt the back of his neck go cold. He didn't know why. He leaned out the window a little more and looked at the shorter woman beside her. She hadn't moved. She was staring straight ahead, her lips pressed together, both hands folded in front of her like she was standing in a church. "You from around here?" Harold asked. The taller woman looked at him again. "We used to be," she said. He drove them into town. He didn't ask any more questions. Not because he didn't have them, but because something in the silence of that truck cab told him that whatever these women had been through, it wasn't something they were ready to pour out to a stranger on a Tuesday morning. He kept his eyes on the road, but twice he glanced in the rearview mirror, and both times he found the taller woman watching him with those steady, careful eyes. When he pulled up in front of the Canyon Ridge Sheriff's office, the shorter woman finally spoke for the first time. Her voice was softer, younger sounding, and it cracked a little on the words. "Is this still Sheriff Braddock's office?" she asked. Harold turned in his seat. "Braddock retired about 6 years back. Sheriff Pruitt runs things now." "Why? You know Braddock?" The shorter woman looked at her sister. Something passed between them, something fast and heavy and private. "We knew him," the taller one said. "A long time ago." Harold got out and walked them to the door. He would later tell his wife that he felt, in that moment, like he was walking beside ghosts. Not because they seemed unreal, but because they seemed too real, too present, too careful. The way a person is when they've had to fight hard just to stay solid in the world. Inside the sheriff's office, Deputy Roy Lester was the first to see them. He was 24 years old, Canyon Ridge born and bred, and he had grown up hearing the story of the Harriman girls the way children grow up hearing about floods and fires, as a cautionary tale, as a local wound that never quite healed over. He looked at the two women standing in the doorway and felt something shift in his chest. He couldn't say why. He had never seen them before in his life. "Can I help you?" he said. The taller woman stepped forward. "My name is Evelyn Harriman," she said. "This is my sister June. We disappeared from Canyon Ridge in June of 1961. We'd like to speak with the sheriff." Roy Lester did not move for a full 5 seconds. The clock on the wall ticked. A fly buzzed somewhere near the window. Outside, a car passed slow on the street. Then he picked up the phone. Sheriff Dale Pruitt was a big man with a careful mind, the kind of man who didn't say much because he was always thinking more than he was talking. He had a habit of pressing his thumb against his lips when he was working through something difficult, and when he walked into the front room of his office that morning and saw those two women, that thumb went straight to his lips. He looked at Evelyn first, then June, then back to Evelyn. "You want to tell me your names again?" he said quietly. "Evelyn Harriman and June Harriman." Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "Our mother was Clara Harriman. Our father was Robert Harriman. He worked at the Grover Mill on Sycamore Road. We went missing the summer of '61. We were 8 and 11 years old." Pruitt pulled out a chair. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you, please." He called Dr. Whitfield before he asked a single question. He was smart enough to know that whatever these women had been through, he needed a witness and he needed documentation. And in Canyon Ridge, in 1974, with the civil rights scars still fresh and the old Southern order still trying to hold itself together with pride and silence, a man like Pruitt also knew that whatever story came out of this room had to be airtight. Because there were people in this town who would not want to believe it, and there were people who had built their whole sense of themselves on not believing things that disturbed their comfort. While they waited for the doctor, Pruitt poured 2 cups of water and set them on the table. June took hers with both hands and drank it slowly, like she was savoring it. Evelyn didn't touch hers for a long time. Pruitt sat across from them. He folded his hands on the table. "You don't have to tell me everything right now," he said. "But can you tell me where you've been?" Evelyn looked at her sister. June gave a small, almost invisible nod. "Thunder Valley," Evelyn said. The room went still. Roy Lester, standing by the door, felt a chill move through him that he would remember for the rest of his life. Thunder Valley was not a place Canyon Ridge people talked about casually. It sat about 14 miles southeast of town, a low stretch of dense forest and broken ground that had been avoided by locals for generations. Some said it was the land itself, the way it seemed to swallow sound, the way the weather turned strange and violent when you got close to its edges. Others said it had an older, darker history, the kind that went back before anyone living could remember clearly, but that the land itself seemed to hold in its roots and its soil. Most people just stayed away. "Thunder Valley," Pruitt repeated. His voice was neutral, but his thumb went back to his lip. "How long were you there?" 13 years, Evelyn said. The word sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. 13 years. Evelyn had been 11 when she disappeared. She was 24 now. June had been 8. She was 21. Pruitt leaned forward slowly. "And who kept you there?" For the first time, something moved across Evelyn's face. Not fear, exactly. Something older and more complicated. The way a person looks when they're trying to describe a color that doesn't have a name. "A man," she said. "His name was Merritt Cole." The name meant nothing to Pruitt, but he wrote it down. He wrote it down with the careful, deliberate hand of a man who understood that he was writing the beginning of something very large. Doctor. Whitfield arrived 20 minutes later, a thin, serious man in his 50s who had practiced medicine in Canyon Ridge for nearly 3 decades and thought he had seen most of what this world had to offer. He examined both women with gentle efficiency, speaking quietly, asking permission before every touch. When he finished, he pulled Pruitt aside in the hallway. He kept his voice low. "They're malnourished, but not severely," he said. "They've been eating, but not well. Their muscle tone is poor, consistent with a life spent largely indoors or in confined spaces." He paused. "There are marks on their wrists, Dale. Old scarring, consistent with long-term, repeated restraint." Pruitt looked at the closed door. "They weren't free," Whitfield said quietly. "Whatever this man told them, whatever they believed, they were not free." Back in the room, June sat with her hands in her lap, very still. Evelyn sat straight-backed, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. She had the posture of someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was safer than movement. Pruitt came back in and sat down across from her. He looked at her for a moment. "Evelyn," he said, "I want to find this man. I want to understand what happened to you. But I need you to help me. Can you do that?" Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Outside, the August sun was pressing hard against the windows. A fan turned slow overhead. Somewhere down the street, a child was laughing. "I can try," Evelyn said. And then, in a voice as quiet and steady as water moving underground, she began to speak. Evelyn's voice was low and even, and she spoke the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed something inside their head for years without knowing they were doing it. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like a woman walking a path she had already walked 1,000 times in the dark. She said it started with the storm. June 1961. The sky over Canyon Ridge had turned the color of old bruises for 3 days straight before the real weather hit. Their mother Clara had sent them out to the edge of the property to bring in the washing before the rain came down. Evelyn was 11. June was 8. The line was strung between 2 posts behind the house, and they were pulling the sheets down. And that was when he appeared. Merritt Cole came out of the tree line like he had been standing there for hours, waiting. He was a tall man, lean, with pale eyes and a calm face that Evelyn said always unsettled her more than any raised voice could have. He didn't look dangerous. That was the thing she kept coming back to, even all these years later. He didn't look like what he was. "He told us the storm was going to be bad," Evelyn said. "He said he had seen storms like this before, and people got hurt, and he had a place that was safe, and our mother had asked him to come get us." Pruitt kept his face still. "Did you believe him?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I was 11, she said. "And he said our mother's name. He said Clara. He said she was already worried and we needed to go right now." June made a small sound beside her. Not a word, just a sound, low and caught in the throat, like something that had never fully finished becoming grief. "I held June's hand," Evelyn continued, "and I followed him into the trees. I thought we were going somewhere close. I thought we'd be back before supper." They were not back before supper. They were not back for 13 years. Pruitt leaned back in his chair. His deputy Roy was still by the door, and Pruitt could see the young man's hands gripping the back of his own belt, knuckles going white. Pruitt kept his voice measured. "How far did he take you that first day?" "Hours," Evelyn said. "We walked for hours, and June started crying after a while, and he told her to stop, and when she didn't stop, he grabbed her arm." She paused. "He didn't hit her, not that time. He just held her arm until she understood that crying wasn't something he was going to allow." The room was very quiet. Dr. Whitfield, sitting in the corner with his notepad, stopped writing. "She was 8 years old," Evelyn said, and for the first time her voice cracked, just once. Then she pulled it back. "She was 8 years old, and she stopped crying, and she held my hand, and we kept walking. The house in Thunder Valley was real. Evelyn described it in the way that people describe places they know better than their own bodies. The slant of the floor in the back room, the way one window let in a strip of morning light that moved across the wall like a slow clock, the smell of wood smoke and damp earth that was always present, winter and summer both. Merritt Cole had built it, or rebuilt it. She wasn't sure which. It sat on old foundations, and he told them once that the land had been used before, a long time before, by people who understood the valley's nature. He said it like it was something to be proud of. He said the valley chose its people. He was very calm about everything, Evelyn said. That was the worst part. He was never wild, never out of control. He had rules, and the rules were absolute. And if you broke a rule, the punishment was quiet and cold, and it lasted longer than any shouting would have. Pruitt asked what the rules were. Evelyn looked at her hands. No going past the far tree line. No speaking above a certain volume after dark. No asking about town, about our mother, about anything outside the valley. She paused. No crying. What happened when a rule was broken? Pruitt asked. June answered that one. It was the most she had spoken since she walked in, and her voice was soft, but her words were not. The ropes, she said. He tied our wrists to the bed frame. Not tight enough to cut, just tight enough so that we couldn't forget. He'd leave us for a day, sometimes two. No food. He'd come back and he'd sit down and he'd ask if we understood now. And we'd say yes, because what else were we going to say? Roy Lester turned away from the door. He faced the wall. Nobody called him on it. Pruitt pressed his thumb to his lip. He was thinking hard and fast, and he kept his voice gentle. Did he ever say why? He asked. Did he ever give a reason for why he took you? Evelyn looked at him steadily. He said we were meant to be there, she said. He said the valley had called for us, the way it had called for others before. He talked about the old families, the ones who had worked that land 100 years back, before the war. He said their blood was still in the ground, and the valley needed to be tended by the right people, and we were the right people. Pruitt went very still. Which war? He said. The war between the states, Evelyn said. He talked about it like it had just happened, like the wounds were still fresh. He kept a book, an old ledger, and he would read from it sometimes in the evenings, names and dates. He said they were the names of people who had worked the valley before us. He said we were continuing their work. Whitfield looked up from his notepad. He and Pruitt exchanged a glance across the room. Did he ever show you the ledger? Pruitt asked. He showed me once, Evelyn said. I was maybe 14 or 15. He opened it to a page near the middle and told me to read a name. The name was written in old ink, faded almost to nothing. It wasn't a full name, just a first name, and then the word property written next to it. She stopped. Her jaw tightened again. He said that was what the valley was built on. He said it was what everything was built on, and the valley remembered, and we were part of that memory now. The word property sat in the middle of that room like something with weight and temperature. Roy Lester turned back around from the wall. His face had gone through several things and settled somewhere between fury and sickness. He was keeping a record, Pruitt said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. He was keeping a record the way they used to keep records.
He believed he owned us,
Evelyn said. Her voice was flat and precise.
He never said it in those exact words. He didn't have to. Everything he did said it for him.
June reached out under the table and found her sister's hand. Evelyn let her take it. Pruitt stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment with his back to the room, and then he turned around. I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is hard, he said. Were there others? Did you ever see anyone else in that valley, any other person he might have brought there? Evelyn and June looked at each other. That look again, deep and fast and full of something that had no name in ordinary language. "There was a boy," June said. The room shifted. "His name was Thomas," she continued. "He was there when we arrived." He was older than Evelyn, maybe 15 or 16. He had been there a long time already. He didn't talk much. He kept to the far end of the property, and he did the heavy work, the wood, the water. Merritt called him by a different name. "What name?" Pruitt asked. June's voice dropped. "He called him the worker." Pruitt came back to the table slowly. He sat down. "Where is Thomas now?" June's eyes dropped to her lap. "He ran," she said. "One night, maybe 2 years after we arrived." "He ran and Merritt went after him, and Merritt came back alone the next morning. He sat down at the table, and he ate his breakfast, and he didn't say a single word about it, and we never asked. And Thomas never came back." The silence after that was different from the silences before it. It had a different weight. Pruitt looked at Evelyn. "Do you think Thomas was still alive when Merritt came back?" Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, Canyon Ridge was going about its Tuesday afternoon. People walking to the post office, children cutting through the side streets. The ordinary world moving at its ordinary pace, completely unaware that inside this building, the floor had just dropped out from under everything. "I don't know," Evelyn said. And then, very quietly, "I tried not to think about it, because if I thought about it, I couldn't keep going." Pruitt pressed both palms flat on the table. "I'm going to find out," he said. "I promise you that. Whatever happened in that valley, I am going to find out." Evelyn looked at him with those steady, ancient eyes, and she said something that Pruitt would hear in his head for the rest of his life. "Sheriff," she said, "the valley has been keeping secrets since before any of us were born. I'm not sure it plans to stop now." Pruitt didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk until past 2 in the morning with a yellow legal pad in front of him and wrote down everything the sisters had said, not in the clipped language of official reports, but word for word, the way Evelyn had told it. The pauses and the silences, and the places where June's hand had tightened around her sister's. He wrote it all down because he understood, in a way that he couldn't fully articulate yet, that what these 2 women had brought into his office was not just a criminal matter. It was something older and heavier than that. It was the kind of thing that this part of the country had a long history of burying deep and marking with silence. By morning, he had made 3 decisions. First, he would organize a search party into Thunder Valley. Second, he would pull every record he could find on a man named Merritt Cole. Third, he would find out what happened to the boy named Thomas. The search party went in on a Thursday. Pruitt took Roy Lester and 2 other deputies, a man named Cal Briggs, who had grown up near the valley's edge and knew the terrain, and a state investigator named Frank Aldis, who drove up from Nashville with a stiff manner and expensive shoes that were absolutely wrong for the ground he was about to walk on. Evelyn had given them directions as precisely as she could, and Pruitt had written them down 3 times to be sure. Cal Briggs said almost nothing on the drive out. He was a quiet man by nature. But this was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes from unease a person doesn't want to admit to. When they turned off the paved road and onto the dirt track that pushed toward the valley's edge, he gripped the door handle with one hand and stared straight ahead. Roy noticed. "You all right, Cal?" he asked. "My grandfather told me never to go into that valley," Cal said. "His grandfather told him the same thing." "Why?" Roy asked. Cal was quiet for a moment. "He said the ground in there doesn't forget what it's been used for," he said. "And I always figured that was just old talk, superstition." He paused. Now I'm not so sure." Nobody laughed. That said something. They found the foundations 2 hours in. Frank Aldis was the first one to speak when they came to the clearing where the structure had stood, and what he said was not a professional observation. What he said was a single word, spoken under his breath, and it was not a word fit for print. Because the foundation stones were not the remains of a simple backcountry house, they were massive, fitted granite blocks laid with a precision that spoke of money and intention, the kind of construction that required labor, significant labor, sustained over time. Pruitt crouched down and pressed his hand to the nearest stone. It was cold, even in the August heat. He looked at the layout of the foundation, the size of it, the rooms he could map out in his mind from the footprint alone. "This isn't a homesteader's cabin," Frank Aldis said, his expensive shoes forgotten. "This is a plantation structure, or what's left of one." Cal Briggs stood back from the rest of them. His arms were crossed. He didn't come any closer. Pruitt stood up. "How old?" he asked. "Pre-war," Aldis said. "Well, pre-war. This could go back to the 1830s, maybe earlier." He walked the perimeter slowly. "Somebody poured serious resources into this ground, and then, at some point, somebody else came back and built on top of it." That was when Roy Lester found the post. It was at the far edge of the cleared ground, half swallowed by roots and time, but standing. A single thick wooden post, maybe 6 feet tall, driven deep into the earth. The wood was dark with age and weather. Near the base, iron hardware was still fixed to it, rusted nearly to nothing but unmistakably there. Rings. 2 rings, set at wrist height. Nobody said what it was. Nobody needed to. Pruitt stared at it for a long time. Then he turned and walked back toward the foundation, and he said in a voice that was perfectly controlled and therefore told Roy everything about how he was actually feeling. "Pull it up. The whole thing. Photograph everything first, then pull it up and bag it." They found the ledger under the foundation stones. Not Merritt Cole's ledger, an older one. Aldis was the one who eased it out of the gap between 2 of the lower stones, and he handled it with the care of a man who understood what he was holding. The cover was gone, eaten away by time, but the interior pages, protected by the stone above them, had survived in a way that seemed almost impossible. The ink was faded and brown, and the handwriting was the formal copperplate script of the 19th century. Aldis read from it slowly, piecing together the words. It was a record. A property record. Names, dates, physical descriptions. Every entry had a dollar value beside it. He stopped at a particular page. He looked at Pruitt. "There's a notation here," he said. 1847. It says the property passed to a man named Elias Cole. Pruitt felt the name land in his chest. "Cole," he said. "Cole," Aldis confirmed. Roy Lester said what they were all thinking. "Merritt Cole. He came back to land his family owned. Land that had been worked by people they owned." Pruitt looked at the ledger, and then at the iron rings on the post, and then at the massive fitted stones of the foundation, and something shifted in his understanding of what had happened to Evelyn and June Harriman. It was not just the story of one deranged man in the woods. It was the continuation of a story that had started more than a century before any of them were born. A story about what certain men believed they were entitled to, and what they would do to hold on to that belief, and how the land itself could be made to carry that belief forward through time like water moving underground, invisible until it broke through the surface somewhere unexpected. He looked at Cal Briggs, who was still standing at the edge of the clearing with his arms crossed, not looking at any of it. "Your grandfather was right," Pruitt said quietly. Cal said nothing, but he nodded once. They drove back to Canyon Ridge with the evidence bagged and catalogued and the photographs taken, and Pruitt went straight to the records office. He pulled land deeds, tax records, court documents. He pulled them for the name Cole, going back as far as the records went, and what he found confirmed what the ledger suggested. The land in Thunder Valley had been registered to Elias Cole in 1831. It had passed through 2 more generations of the same family before the records went quiet around 1902. Then nothing. For decades, nothing. Until 1958, when a man named Merritt Cole filed a claim of occupancy on a parcel of land in Thunder Valley, citing family inheritance, 3 years before the girls disappeared. Pruitt sat with that document for a long time. He thought about Merritt Cole filing that claim, walking back onto land that his ancestors had built with hands that weren't their own, into a valley that his family had poisoned for generations, and deciding that it was his by right. He thought about what it meant that this man had sat in a government office and filled out paperwork with a pen, claiming ownership of the ground, and then 3 years later had walked out of the trees and taken 2 little girls by the hand. He thought about the boy named Thomas. He thought about what it meant that Merritt Cole had used the word worker. He thought about the ledger and its careful entries of names and values, and he thought about how that same cold calculus had lived on inside Merritt Cole, like a seed, patient and quiet, waiting for the right conditions. He called Evelyn that evening. She was staying at the county women's shelter with June, and the woman who ran it had told Pruitt that neither sister had slept more than a few hours since they arrived. When Evelyn picked up the phone, her voice was alert, the way people are alert when they have trained themselves never to be caught off guard. "We found the house," Pruitt said. "What was left of it." Silence on the line. "Evelyn, the land that Cole was keeping you on, it belonged to his family. Going back to before the Civil War. It was a plantation holding. We found records." Another silence, longer this time. "I know," she said. Pruitt gripped the phone. "You knew?" "He told me," she said. "Not everything, but he told me the land had always been in his family. He told me his great-grandfather had built something important there. He was proud of it. He said the Cole name meant something in that valley." Her voice went flat and careful again. "I was 17 when he told me. I didn't fully understand what I was hearing, but I understood that whatever his family had built there, it was built the same way everything in this part of the country was built, on the backs of people who were never given the choice." Pruitt pressed his thumb to his lip. His hand was not entirely steady. "Evelyn, the boy Thomas, what did he look like?" The pause that followed was the longest yet. "He was black," Evelyn said. "He was black, and he had been there longer than we had, and Merritt Cole had a different set of rules for him than he had for us." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I have thought about Thomas every single day for 13 years. I have thought about whether I could have done something, whether I should have run with him when he ran." "You were a child," Pruitt said. "I was old enough to know what I was watching," Evelyn said. And the grief in her voice was not the grief of a woman who had forgiven herself. It was the grief of a woman who wasn't sure she ever would. Pruitt told her good night. He set the phone down on his desk and sat in the silence of his office for a long time, and he thought about a boy named Thomas who had run into the dark of Thunder Valley and never come back. He thought about what the ground in that valley had been used for, and what it remembered, and what it was still holding. And he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones and didn't move, that he was not close to the bottom of this yet. The search for Thomas began the same way most searches for black men in the American South began in 1974. Slowly, with resistance, and against a current of institutional indifference that Pruitt had to fight at every turn. He drove to the state records office in Nashville himself, because he didn't trust a phone call to carry the weight of what he needed. He sat across from a clerk named Gerald Moss, A man in his late 40s with the particular kind of tired that comes from decades of processing paperwork in a building where history goes to be filed and forgotten. Pruitt set his notebook on the counter and asked for any missing persons reports filed in a 6-county radius between 1958 and 1963 involving a black male juvenile. Gerald Moss looked at him over his glasses. "That's a broad request," he said. "I know," Pruitt said. "I need everything." Moss came back 40 minutes later with a thin folder. Pruitt opened it at the counter and read through it standing up because he was too keyed up to sit. There were 11 entries. Most were adults. 2 were juveniles. One of the juvenile entries stopped him cold. Filed in September 1959. A boy named Thomas Beaumont, age 14, reported missing by his grandmother, a woman named Ida Beaumont of Clover Creek, 2 counties east of Canyon Ridge. The reporting officer's notes were 3 lines long. The follow-up notation read, "No further investigation warranted. Case closed." Pruitt stared at that notation for a long time. No further investigation warranted. 4 words that had buried a 14-year-old boy as efficiently as any shovel. He drove to Clover Creek that same afternoon. Ida Beaumont was still alive. She was 73 years old, and she lived in the same house she had always lived in, a small wood frame house at the end of a dirt road. And when Pruitt knocked on her door and introduced himself, she looked at him with eyes that had been waiting for this knock for 15 years. Not hopefully, not expectantly, just waiting, the way a person waits when they have been disappointed so many times that hope has been replaced by something quieter and more durable. Endurance, pure endurance. She let him in without a word. They sat at her kitchen table, and she poured coffee without asking if he wanted any, and Pruitt understood that was her way of saying she knew this was going to take time, and she was prepared for it. "Tell me about Thomas," Pruitt said. Ida Beaumont wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Thomas was my daughter's boy," she said. "His mother passed when he was 6, influenza. He came to live with me after that. He was a good boy, quiet, worked hard, minded himself." She paused. "He disappeared in the summer of '59. I reported it. The sheriff at the time, man named Dawes, told me boys like Thomas run off all the time. Told me not to worry myself." Her mouth tightened. "Boys like Thomas," that's what he said. Pruitt set his pen down. "Mrs. Beaumont, I believe I know what happened to Thomas, and I want to tell you everything I know, and I want you to know that whatever I find, I am going to pursue it as far as it goes. But I need to ask you something first." She nodded. "Did Thomas ever mention a man named Merritt Cole?" Ida Beaumont's hands tightened around her cup so hard Pruitt thought it might crack. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on a human face before, and he had been a law officer for 22 years. It was not surprise. It was the terrible, exhausted recognition of someone who has always known the name of the thing that hurt them, but was never given permission to say it out loud. "He came around here," she said. "Cole. He came around in the spring of '59, maybe 2-3 months before Thomas went missing. He told Thomas he had work in the valley, good pay, steady work." Her voice was thin and precise. "I told Thomas not to go. I told him something was wrong with that man. The way he looked at Thomas, the way he talked." She stopped. "But Thomas needed work, and I couldn't give him what that man was offering. And so, one morning in July, he said he was going to go see about it. And he never came home." Pruitt drove back to Canyon Ridge in the dark, and by the time he got to his office, he had made a decision that he knew was going to cost him something. He was going to go into that valley himself. Not with a search party, not with state investigators and expensive shoes. Just him and Roy Lester and Cal Briggs, who knew the ground and whatever was left of his belief that justice was still possible in a country that had spent 200 years deciding whose pain counted and whose didn't. They went in before dawn on a Saturday morning. Cal led them deep past the foundation site, further into the valley than the first search had gone, into ground that was soft and low, and had the feel of a place that collected water and held it. Cal moved slowly and said nothing. He was following something Pruitt couldn't name, some combination of old knowledge and instinct that had been passed down through his family, the way certain things get passed down in the South, not in words, but in the body, in the careful avoidance of certain places, in the particular silence that falls when a name is mentioned that everyone in the room recognizes, but no one will say. They found it 2 hours in. Roy saw it first. He stopped walking and put his arm out to stop Pruitt, and Pruitt looked where Roy was looking, and he saw the ground. It had been disturbed, not recently, long ago, years ago, but the earth had never fully settled back to flat. It rose in a long, low shape that anyone with eyes could read if they were willing to look at it honestly. Pruitt stood at the edge of it and took off his hat. Roy Lester was 24 years old and had grown up in Canyon Ridge and believed, the way young men in small southern towns often believe, that the worst of what this country had done was behind it, sealed away in history books and old photographs in the careful distance of time. He stood beside his sheriff at the edge of that low mound and felt something inside him rearrange itself permanently. Some innocence, some comfortable distance collapsed and did not come back. Cal Briggs stood behind them both with his arms at his sides and his head bowed. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man arriving at a place he has known about his whole life without knowing the exact address. They marked it. They documented it. Pruitt called the state from a payphone at the nearest gas station and used a tone of voice he had never used before in his professional life. A voice that left no room for the usual hesitation and bureaucratic friction. He said a boy had been found in Thunder Valley, and he needed forensic support, and he needed it immediately. And something in his voice, some compressed fury that had been building since he first looked at the notation "no further investigation warranted," must have transmitted clearly through the telephone line, because the man on the other end said yes, without argument. The forensic team confirmed it within 48 hours. Human remains, male, juvenile, consistent with the late 1950s to early 1960s based on soil analysis and the condition of the grave. There was no Merritt Cole to arrest. A search of the surrounding counties found no trace of him. It was as if he had walked back into the valley after the girls escaped, and the valley had taken him the way it had taken everything else. Some people in Canyon Ridge said that quietly, in the weeks that followed, that the valley had finally settled its own accounts. Pruitt didn't believe in that kind of thinking, but he understood why people reached for it. Sometimes the truth is so large and so heavy that people need a story to carry it with. Evelyn and June came to the sheriff's office one more time, 2 weeks after the remains were found. Pruitt told them himself. He sat across from them at the same table where it had all started, and he told them about Thomas Beaumont and about Ida Beaumont in Clover Creek and about what the ground in Thunder Valley had finally given back. June covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook. Evelyn sat straight and still, and 2 tears ran down her face, and she did not wipe them away. She just let them fall. "He ran because of us," she said. "No," Pruitt said firmly. "He ran because a man had stolen his freedom and treated him as property, and he had every right in God's creation to run. What happened to Thomas is on Merritt Cole and on every system and every person that let that man operate in that valley for years without question." Evelyn looked at him. "People knew," she said quietly. "People in this town knew something was wrong in that valley. People always know. They just decide it's easier not to ask." Pruitt did not argue with her. He couldn't. She was right. What came after was slow and imperfect, the way justice usually is when it arrives late. A formal investigation was opened. The land in Thunder Valley was seized by the state. The old ledger from the coal plantation was transferred to a historical archive in Nashville, where it joined thousands of other documents that recorded, in the careful handwriting of men who considered themselves civilized, the systematic destruction of other human beings for profit. Ida Beaumont was notified officially about Thomas. She received the news sitting at her kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup, and she said nothing for a long time. And then she said, "I want him brought home." And he was. Canyon Ridge held a quiet memorial for Thomas Beaumont in September of 1974. Not many people came. Some who should have came did not. Some who came sat in the back and left before it was over. But Evelyn and June were there, in the front row, and they stayed until the very end. Afterward, Evelyn stood outside in the late afternoon light, and a reporter from the county paper asked her what she wanted people to take from the story of what had happened in Thunder Valley. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. She was 24 years old, and she had the eyes of someone much older, and she said something that the reporter wrote down and printed, and that people in Canyon Ridge would quote for years, sometimes understanding it, and sometimes not. "Don't mourn what the valley kept," she said. "Mourn that you let it keep it for so long." She took June's hand. They walked to the car together, and Canyon Ridge stood in the September light and tried to reckon with the truth that two women who had survived the unsurvivable had just handed it, plainly and without apology, the full weight of what it had always known and never been willing to say.